Many people who know me know I am a big fan of Panic at the Disco, but not as many people are aware of the extent to which I am a fan of pre-split Panic at the Disco. So let's get into that. In the early 2000s, two childhood best friends, Spencer Smith and Ryan Ross, now teenagers, were seeking something better to do with their time than scrape their knees on skateboards in the dusty suburbs of Las Vegas, Nevada. They came together and created a cover band for Blink-182 called Pet Salamander, later briefly the Summer League. To give these songs a more full breadth, they realized they needed to seek new blood and found this in bassist Brent Wilson. Later, they also took on eager go-getter Brendon Urie as a support guitarist. Shortly after the addition of Wilson and Urie, the band would change their name to Panic at the Disco, taken from the lyrics of a name-taken song. While covering for vocals one day at rehearsal, Ross pointed out that Urie had a great voice, a much more capable and confident one than he himself had. Maybe from all those hymnals at church. So, in one fell swoop, the duty of singing the words shifted from Ross to Brendon. Some band historians, myself included, may cite this as a cataclysmic turn of events, but ultimately it was the better move for marketing. The band would later grapple with their marketability, at one point literally complaining that they had gotten free airplay, citing that they felt too underdeveloped. But they haven't taken off yet. In 2004, Ryan Ross took to his favorite blogging platform, LiveJournal, and posted the band's pure volume URL for advertisement. He stated it would be, like, totally seen for you to like them. Feeling a rush of confidence one can only attribute to a teenager in late October, he then posted the URL directly to the LiveJournal of lyricist guitarist for Fall Out Boy, Pete Wentz, fresh off of his success with 2003's Take This to Your Grave. Wentz, hit by both the sheer audacity and some dumb curiosity, gave this plucky loser's demo a listen, and was awestruck. He would later go on to comment that at the time he thought there was no way he could sign this band, that they had to have labels all over them. Remaining citations of Wentz's and Ross's initial LiveJournal conversations have Wentz comparing Urie to Fall Out Boy's Patrick Stump, unsurprisingly, and citing that Wentz couldn't stop listening to their band. Ross let Wentz know that they had just lined up a gig, their first one ever, that weekend, and that they were still having trouble tracking their synth sounds to the live music. So, Wentz signed them. The second band on his Decay Dance label, right behind Take a Look at My Girlfriend, Gym Class Heroes, Wentz told Panic that they could be the next The Academy Is. Wentz soon flew out to Las Vegas and bought the band a king's lunch of Del Taco as they would discuss his expectations for the band and fill out paperwork. He would need to see an album by the year's end, 3 months, despite the band only having 2 full demos, Nails for Breakfast, Tacks for Snacks, and Time to Dance. And only 3 full songs written. Ross, being the only one in college at the time, would need to wait for the rest of his bandmates to graduate high school before they could even record the album. But it was all they wanted to do with their lives. On September 25th, 2007, A Fever You Can't Sweat Out was released. The 40-minute album was a smash success with the scene. Young women and girls raved, the likes of which we may not have seen since the Beatles. And Pitchfork reviews also dropped. which echoed that same familiar contradictory sentiment. Fever was called a steaming pile of garbage, vague teen heartache, the death of emo. Truly, one thing stays the same. Academia does not respect the opinion of young women. But we're not making Beatles comparisons yet. Fever would peak at 13th on the Billboard 200s and 2nd for top rock albums, alongside greats like Death Cab for Cutie's Plans, the phrase How to Save a Life, and Kanye West's Late Registration. The highest rating single on the album, indeed maybe the only one you knew before you cared, I Write Sins Not Tragedies, peaked at number 2 on the top 40s and 12th for alternative airplay. It was ridiculously objectivized by people who just had no genre to shoehorn it into.
Well, imagine as I'm pacing the pews in a church
Called Baroque hip-hop, psychedelic electro-pop, vaudeville rock. And that was part of its charm. It appealed to both the normal kids and the highly individualistic emo scene crowd. Compared to some of Urie's recent work, this 5-week chart seems pretty modest, but considering these kids had only played their first show less than a year ago and nigh solo lyricist and primarily credited composer Ryan Ross had bashed out 10 more songs within a few months, releasing finished versions just shy of his 19th birthday, one could say they were experiencing just a smidge of beginner's luck, and maybe even some shell shock. Panic rode the success of their chart topper for a few festivals, the Nintendo Fusion tape cover, and Truck Stops and State Lines tours, as well as a commendable number of other stops, cultivating a more and more dramatic and devoted fan base. I don't feel like talking about the rabidity of teenage girls, but Beatlemania comes to mind. Not yet. The music on Fever was unapologetic, even cringy, using multiple Chuck Palahniuk novels for inspiration and flirting heavily with gender expectations and expressions. It hypothesized about scenarios the boys had seen the grungy edges of growing up in the suburbs of Las Vegas. Troubles like strip clubs and coerced sex workers, as well as some more personal topics, like Ross's home life and struggle with his father's addiction, as well as his experience being cheated on and how good it would feel to know that she's thinking of him while he's moving on. They began a tragically unnamed 2006 summer tour with the Dresden Dolls, producing some fake drama on a Dresden Dolls music video, Backstabber, not unlike what you might have seen in the Sticky House if it had ever actually taken off.
White milk.
Skim milk.
White.
It also began, or at least lit the fuse, on the band's experimentation with makeup. The Lucent Dossier Experience vaudeville troupe, previously seen as the Circus troupe in their famed I Write Sins Not Tragedies music video, would tour with the band and teach Ryan Ross how to do his makeup. This is cited by band historians as a wonderful big brain smart guy move. Ryan Ross's makeup in this time is pretty heavily lauded for its audaciousness, as he was already doing the pout, wearing a girly haircut and tight jeans and vanilla deodorant.
Mine smells like...
I wish you could smell me
I
just...
have vanilla deodorant. Smell.
I used the other one.
You actually do smell really good. You smell like a girl.
The band would also commission 5 students from the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. Willie Marshall, Jake Oliver, Emiliano Santillan, Hyunwoo Shin, and Aram Bashian. These gentlemen designed some real art, which subsequently lived in a bus for weeks on end and got washed or sprayed less than infrequently. Band members still have some of those pieces, but others were tragically lost to time or hotel venues. The Rose Vest was lost in a hotel and never returned, despite this being this cultural microcosm's Mona Lisa. At least before Brendon got that and ran with it. Short segue, I don't mean to cut Spencer and Jon Walker out of the fashion, but Spencer, while he also had lovely things crafted for him, had to drop them for mobility on his drum set. And Jon is a Californian beach bum at heart, and no one will ever rip his linens and sandals from him. We do love them for their commitment, which highlighted the crazy theatrical antics of Ryan and Brendon. From here, the band pulled the Leeds Festival 2006 Lollapalooza and their first stint at Reading, where an infamous bottling incident took place. While on stage at 2006 Reading, Urie took a bottle of Sprite directly to the face and was ushered off briefly. He cited a short blackout, and his band members reacted viciously when asked for comment. But ever the showman, Urie rallied and ushered his band members back on stage to finish their set. I may not like the man, but he is pretty professional when it comes to that part of his job. And then, Nothing Rhymes with Circus. Nothing Rhymes with Circus is one of the more famous events in the band's history at this time, possibly only second to the 2007 MTV Music Awards. Nothing Rhymes with Circus brought the Lucette Dossier dancers back, and a little girl drama alongside, and a bigger and even more elaborate set, incorporating the old stage lights. Brendon would debut what I can only refer to as the puppet look. No, not that one. The one he's trying to cover up by doing that one. Alongside Ryan's Newsies hat. The man really pulled it off better this time, though you really can't fault him for wanting to look pretty and not having the dough to in high school. They also recorded live in Denver at this time, which contains the only version of Tonight Tonight that I can stand.
The more you change, the less you fear.
Billy Corgan can eat it. These tours were so expensive that they hardly made any money, and what they did was exclusively on t-shirts, not even ticket sales, which is both a highly high school graduate decision to make and also incredibly respectable. These kids were selling you a show. It wasn't just live music, it was a circus and a serenade and a vaudeville performance. Spencer at one point mused to his mother that he would have liked to see carousels and live tigers on stage. I wish. I just realized that in this time I've forgotten to cover Brent's departure. Brent did not leave peaceably, despite the band's best efforts to let him go with little bad press. He opted to sue, and his brother took to the media, demonizing the band for letting Brent go via phone call. This is hard to track back perfectly, and impossible to know who was right, but Brent mostly shies away from his brief brush with stardom now that he's in his 30s. The band at the time would have you know that Jon took over Brent's place because Brent would either not show up to rehearsal or show up only minutes before the show would begin, entirely missing sound check, leading to Jon and other intermittent bassists playing the majority of the pieces, including, by the embittered band's late accounts, the entire record of Fever You Can't Sweat Out. Brent still received his cut of the royalties, however, despite their maintenance of his being a terrible bandmate and even a bad musician as they grew less and less patient with his way of making. Brent's departure in summer 2006 earned us bassist Jon Walker, aforementioned beach dad, chill vibes writer, and overall good dude. The band seemed much happier with Jon's fit, and he would continue to contribute in a greater and more broadly musically versed way than Brent. One finds it pretty hard to blame an 18-year-old for being dramatic about international fame, but you do wish the guy had shown up to band practice. Or not if you're a Jon fan. Panic at the Disco played a few festivals, a return to both Leeds and Reading, and a stint at Bumbershoot before performing their breakout hit Sins at MTV Music Awards in 2007. They brought their Lucette Dossier folks back on stage as dancers in giant stilted dresses and the band in new silken duds. It is worth a watch. Then, as the year turned and they began to face their future anew, the band started to tease their fans. In March of 2007, Ryan had begun lyric work on a new album. Brendon was also writing at this time some lyrics that would make it into later albums, and some that would make it into even later albums. After playing in Centennial Park, Georgia, the band went into a sort of summer hibernation in the Nevada mountains. They carried their equipment along and made no public appearances at this time, until July. During this time, the Cabin album was created. Dubbed Cricket and Clover, this album would be more cohesive than their freshman powerhouse. A singular story of two lovers woven through an interlocked track list. The band would tease bits and pieces of this album at subsequent concerts, but ultimately the entire thing would be scrapped sometime in 2007. There is some quiet noise that a copy of at least some of the finished product still survives on an old hard drive or a laptop forgotten in someone's basement, but it seems that even if Jon Walker wanted to let these go, the agents behind the existing Panic brand are not letting that happen. With Cricket and Clover behind them, along with the guitar that Ryan lit on fire and a few months of their cabin-fevered lives, the band would bash through and create their sophomore floral dream. Pretty odd. It would release on March 21st, 2008. I love this album. This one is my favorite.
Oh, how it's been so long. We're so sorry we've been gone. We were busy writing songs for you.
With almost completely nonsensical lyrics, literally cited by the band to have been made up purely for the sake of aesthetics and imagery, this is an album a person tends to only like bits and pieces of. The band returned to their home state of Nevada to record the 15-track album, and despite their kind reminder on the header track that they were still the same band, many fans were struck with the difference, especially after they dropped the iconic exclamation point. Suddenly their hot, sweaty, edgy teenage boy band look had gone to soft, gentle, and meandering vocals and sound with soaring horn music. The only remainder of Cricket and Clover was Urie's Folkin' Around, and a few lyrics he cribbed into Nearly Witches on a later album we're not going to get into in this video. Pretty Odd was not super well liked by the existing fan base at the time, despite debuting at number 2 on Billboard 200 charts and reaching the number 1 spot on US rock charts. But it didn't do as poorly as its predecessor with critics. In fact, it was a pretty brash move from their former sound, and commanded props purely for being such a brave step. As the average Pitchfork enthusiast around this time was feeling very self-satisfied for being a Beatles fan. Yes, it's time to talk about the Beatles. This sounds on Pretty Odd that echoed their Beach Boys' Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Band spoke to the bearded hipsters behind the screen. Unfortunately, Pretty Odd saw a bit of a departure from the stage theatrics of the Fever era, completely removing all use of makeup and stage dancers. The microphones were still wound with flowers, a large wooden sign announced the album of the time, but no dancers would accompany the band on tour. Instead, Panic would join the groups projecting their lyrics behind them and relying on a soft filtered light for a lot of the visuals. And plenty of flowered and paisley shirts and scarves. They would continue their festivals and share concerts with the Hush Sound, Motion City Soundtrack, and old-time friends Cobra Starship, as well as Fall Out Boy. Many of the theatrics were gone, though some still remained in the form of very ambitious music videos, like twee folky That Green Gentleman or the smash hit of their sophomore album, 9 in the Afternoon.
Back to the street where we began.
A softer, genuine love could be heard in some of the winding lyrics, painting a soaring story of the sun and moon as lovers in When the Day Met the Night, or the gentle, imaginative ballad in Northern Downpour. Less angst and bitterness could be heard, which might have soured the teen fans hoping for more songs about money written by machines. Pretty Odd also brought new challenges to the live show. A touring keyboard had to be brought in the form of Eric Roenick. Ross would now sing the majority of an entire song in Behind the Sea, and play half vocals on others like Downpour. And in the inner sanctum of the tour bus, tension between the members brewed. Still showing to audiences well in the tens of thousands, but recognizing the music was heading in splitting directions, key lyricist Ross and bassist Walker began to talk about their forward motion as a band. Smith and Urie had differing ideas. Concerned that they had taken too hard a left at Albuquerque, Smith and Urie wanted to refocus, return back to a more accessible pop sound, and shade the look of before. Whether this was primarily a marketing decision on their behalf or more for a feeling of comfort is for them to say. Walker and Ross, however, enjoyed the rustic feel of their second album and wanted to continue experimenting in psychedelic rock and with inspiration from the Beach Boys. They could not come to a satisfying compromise. On July 6, 2009, Ryan Ross and Jon Walker would depart Panic at the Disco, asking for touring keyboard Eric Roenick's assistance in creating band The Young Vanes. 3 short days later, Panic would continue on, hiring out Ian Crawford and Dallin Weeks to replace their newly lost guitar and bass to finish gigs they'd previously lined up. And also launching into a new tour with Fall Out Boy and Smith's first inspiration, the freshly reformed Blink-182. Some conflict would later come to light about the use of the Panic brand, but the two bands went their separate ways regardless. After a short album, the Young Vanes would dissolve, and Panic at the Disco would soar to new heights likely never expected, losing member after member after touring member, leaving one ex-Mormon man to stand alone. Ultimately, Panic at the Disco shows us how much fame and money can change a group or a single person, and at such a young age, it can be hard to stay cohesive. Everyone experiences growing pains, and everyone has their more or less successful friends. Ultimately, though, every member of this band grew up and did their own thing. Ross and Walker still dabble in music, though not as a collective. Ross occasionally works with ex-girlfriend Z Berg on techno synth sounds, while Walker is doing a dozy alternative study as a family man with an acoustic cover of Panic's It's Almost Halloween in his recent repertoire. Smith produces for the Decay Dance label with his own lovely wife. Wilson went on to study accounting early on and remains relatively private, barring occasional merch hawking online. And of course, Brendon Urie remains as a household name, persistently maintaining that his pop band merits both alternative and rock charts as well, and claiming to be both an individual and group with solo credits. But I'm not bitter or anything. I hope you've learned something about the band, or at least have been reminded about how killer their lyrics and style could be. Thanks for watching. Hi, Phoebe. Can you tell Ryan's my favorite? I mean, I feel like it's not that obvious. It was more obvious in the first script. It's probably pretty obvious. Panic was his band.